Good morning, everyone. And my name is Kirsty Blackstock, as you heard. I'm presenting today from Scotland, Aberdeen. So we're going to talk about the Speyside Malt Whisky value chain. A couple of whisky experts in the audience, I know. So why did we choose this value chain? So single malt whisky has to be made from malted barley and it has to be aged for at least 3 years. And it's a PGI, so another EU certification scheme, a bit like the PDO that Sherman just explained. But the difference here is that the processing must be done in the territory, but the inputs can come from other places. So again, this is an example where the product is very closely based on a territorial identity. It's also a product that is hugely economically important. According to the Scottish Whisky Association, it's worth £5.5 billion to the Scottish economy, an important tax revenue to the UK Treasury. Exports alone were 3.8 billion in 2020, which is down from 4.9 billion pounds. But also there's a large number of distilleries, mainly in mountain areas, total of 134 operating at the moment, and 28 of them in our mountain region landscapes. It's a long-term industry in our landscape. The first one was convened in 1824, so been going for several hundred years, and it's also an expanding industry. So just for those of you who are not that familiar with value chains, I wasn't myself, this is a simplified value chain diagram. So you have the 4 stages: production, processing, distribution, marketing, and consumption. In the grey boxes, you have the practices involved with that. The blue boxes at the top are the territorial capitals that these practices depend on. And you might see here, your traditional materials, but also more symbolic and cultural capitals like image, landscape, history. And in the yellow boxes, you have the flows. They're flows of material, money, knowledge, but also byproducts and waste. So those are the kind of, that's the chain that we're looking at or just starting to look at. So if we move forward, we heard earlier, sorry, I'll just go back. This is our mountain reference landscape with the different distilleries identified. You can see that there are 28 currently working, 2 are mothballed, and they vary a lot in size. So you have number 10, Glenlivet, the biggest producer currently, down to some more family ones like the number 17, much smaller, number 16, much smaller. So quite a variety, heterogeneity of different types of distilleries in this area. But we talked earlier about the fact this is an extended value chain, drawing on territorial capital. And in particular, you see on the left a little infographic, what's in a dram. What is the role of natural capital in underpinning this very important economic value chain? And in particular, we were interested in water quality and quantity. Water is used in 3 ways in whisky. Spring water is used to create the mash, the kind of mix of barley that is fermented with yeast. It's also surface water is used very importantly for the cooling process in the distillation. And that is actually an area that is perhaps less understood, but most vulnerable to climate change. And finally, spring water or mains water is used for dilution once they need to get it to bottling strength. But also the idea of mountain imaginaries, that the selling of the individual single malts using the imagery and traditions and cultures of the different areas. Also, literally in Speyside, we are making connections up and down the catchment from the headwaters in the southwest to where it flows out of the landscape in the northeast. You can see the black dots are the distilleries, and it's connecting the primary manufacturing and service sector. So you see here a little newsletter, one of the local estates producing barley for the distilleries, and it's connecting the local small and medium-sized enterprises with multinationals who are producing these whiskies. So just a little sense of the land cover before I talk a bit about vulnerability. The purple is what we call rough grazing. You can see a picture of what rough grazing looks like in this photograph. The light green is forestry, the dark green is permanent grazing, so livestock. So you can see there's really virtually no arable in the territory. Most of the barley is imported. But these areas of rough grazing, that's the source for the water that is so important to this industry, and that's where we like to see the connection. So in terms of vulnerability to environmental change, you can see here we're focused on spring and surface waters, and we've been following this kind of chain of methodology. So in terms of the factors that people believe influence the availability of water, they were things like air and water temperature, particularly extreme events, low flows, as well as floods, but also the abstraction of water by other sectors, hydropower transfer to aluminium smelters, and housing that is drawing more water. So we asked people about their perceptions of exposure and whether the value chain was sensitive to these factors. And basically you can see that here people felt there were some sensitivities, particularly to the overexploitation issue, but also extreme events, air and water temperature. The reason why they were not really high, these were all seen as having potential negative impacts. They weren't really high because there is quite a lot of adaptive capacity and actions already happening. I'll come back to that. So in terms of who we engage, Sherman showed this really nicely. We're building up our multi-actor platform. We've had 2 meetings so far. So on the left, you can see the kind of actors we've already engaged with so far. And on the right, as we move around these into production, processing, distribution, consumption, the kind of people that we will be engaging in the next few months. We've identified over 100 different organizations we could engage, but we're building it up slowly. There have been some challenges and opportunities. Again, as Sherman noted, it's really essential that we have a multi-actor platform. They have really important local, experiential, and technical knowledge. This is a highly technical processing system, and we need to understand it. We are creating new social networks. Our members are not always familiar with each other, don't necessarily always interact. But it's challenging when organizations have different remits, different spatial scales, different priorities, and we need to find a way of making it relevant to everyone. There's also issues sometimes between a regulator and a regulated industry, and so we need to build trust, air differences, seek solutions. So some areas we want to explore, just as I finish off, relocalization. So there are huge benefits of this value chain to local people. It provides long-term, year-round skilled employment. But where is most value added? We don't know the answer yet, but we suspect most of it is outside of the mountain reference landscape. And the structure of this global value chain is very concentrated. Two multinationals have more than half of the distilleries in the area. So this value chain is creating new alliances between primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors, but there are still barriers to entry for the local people. It's not easy to just set up your own distillery. One of the issues, though, we want to look at is the assemblage with food and drink tourism, which does involve small whiskey tours, whiskey hotels, and bed and breakfasts in the area. So this is all about working with the National Park Authority to connect people, nature, and place. The other thing is the idea of innovation for net zero. So you can see here a clipping from the Macallan Estate website. They are promoting very much their new visitor centre, and distilleries to have 2.2 million visitors a year. They're important tourism experiences in themselves. But this visitor is really promoting sustainability about their use of renewable energy, circular economy, zero waste, and their reductions in energy and water use. So lots of innovations going on by individual distilleries, but also some of the distillery organizations are working with land managers to do work upstream to make that water supply reliable. So here is some re-wetting of peatlands and upland wetlands. And they also pay for the Spey catchment manager. Sorry. So just to finalize, my take-home messages are that we think value chains are a really complementary perspective on uplands or mountains in Scotland because, to be honest, often policy is made in silos for agriculture, for forestry, for tourism. And what I really like about the assemblage of this value chain is it's bringing those silos together. We think our communities of practice can really help translate research into action across these silos. And we hope that we can actually work on how to localize benefits of really important global value chain for the benefit of the people of Speyside. Thank you very much.